So in the past 6 years, I was able to build not one, but 2 agencies from scratch to over 100k a month. And the only way that was possible was by building systems. And now I've used these exact systems to help over 300 founders scale their companies faster. Sam, an email agency owner that I took from 23 to over 80k a month. We've got Toby, who I took from 1k to over 45k a month. And then last but not least, Lorenzo, who I took from 65k to over 140k a month using this system framework that I'm about to teach you. You see, before building systems, I was totally reactive, running around like a headless chicken, constantly in Slack, constantly checking emails, and constantly going to bed at night worrying about 23 different things. And most importantly, even though I was working harder and harder, the revenue would just go up and down constantly. And once I built systems, it was consistent. It was predictable. And today, just like I've been teaching my clients, I'm going to teach you the only 5 steps that you need to build any scalable system. Execute this, you'll be in the top 10%. You ready? Let's do this. Now, if you're wondering, do you need a system? Let me ask you this. Have you been working longer and longer hours, but you're not growing your business? That means you're working on the wrong things. The only way to work on the right things that will grow your business is to implement a system so you can get your time back. That is what I'm going to show you how to do with these 5 steps. So step 1, define your constraint. Step 2, DAD. A little bit random, but you should remember it. Do and document. Step 3, hire through volume. Step 4, set your expectations. And step 5, delegate and evaluate. So firstly, step 1. The thing is you got to build systems for all different parts of your business. But which system do you build first? Well, that's where you need to define the biggest constraint in your business. This is the thing that's stopping your business from growing. There's going to be a lot of things here, but there's going to be one thing that's bigger than everything else. One of my clients recently attended one of Alex Hormozi's workshops, and he said this was the most important thing that they told everyone who attended, that essentially the CEO's role is to understand the biggest constraint in the business, put their resources there, build a system, and then move on to the next constraint. And that is essentially what I'm trying to teach you here. Now, instead of relying on feelings, we want to rely on numbers. And I've worked with over 300 businesses, and I've got some benchmarks for the KPIs and the possible constraints in your business. Now, there's 8 main things that you need to be aware of. Cash reserve, average retainer value, retention rate, calls booked per month, qualified calls, close rate, profit margin, sales cycle length. After working with over 300 businesses, these are all the things that stop them from growing. And you need to identify which one of these is stopping you from growing so you can focus on fixing it and building a system around it. Now, what I've done is I've given some specific benchmarks for each of these things. For example, cash reserve. Benchmark 3 months of operating costs. So then the goal could be, I want to increase my cash from X to Y in a, let's say, 90-day period. Is usually a long enough period of time to make a difference, but not too long that it's too overwhelming. Now, you've got to take into account, if you're just getting started, you don't need to be necessarily worried about 3 months of operating costs in the bank. That's more for businesses that are a little bit more experienced. So take it with a pinch of salt. The average retainer value, you want to get that to 70% of your gross profit margin. And the fastest way to sort that out, by the way, is increase prices. Now, retention rate, you want your clients staying at least 6 months, maybe more like 12 months. Otherwise, you're going to get the leaky bucket scenario where even though you're filling up the bucket with clients, you've got a hole in the bottom, they keep leaking out, and you're just going to build a churn and burn agency. So you need to make sure they stay for at least 6 months. And then you've got the amount of calls booked, which obviously sometimes you do just need more volume. You need to get more sales calls in the calendar. But also remember the qualification of those calls. No point in having 100 calls a month if 90% are unqualified. It's better to have less and have them more qualified so you can increase your close rate, which is from the first call, discovery call, to cash collected and the contract signed. And then you've got your profit margin, and then you've got your sales cycle length. From the very first touch point, if it takes you 2 months, for example, to close a deal, that means if you start speaking to someone today, you only get the cash in 2 months from now. So you need to factor that in, and probably you can do things to shorten the sales cycle length by building more trust. For example, content like this video, if someone watches it, the sales cycle length might shorten. So think through this framework, think about your business, and think, what is the constraint right now that you need to fix? And the other good way to think about this is, in the next 90 days, if you could just fix one thing in your business that would impact everything else, and you can only pick one, what would that one thing be? Because even data aside, that is a good indication that that's the biggest constraint in your business. And it's probably that ugly thing that you've been putting off, by the way. And then what you need to do is you need to block out time in your calendar and tell your team, if you've got a team, so you can make sure you get this done. Now, step 2 to building a scalable system is DAD. Do and document. And the reason I use the acronym DAD is because you have to kind of be the father in this situation. You've got to go in, you've got to do it yourself, and then you can delegate it to someone else. I give this with a bit of context because if you're a massive business, you're not going to be doing this. But I'm speaking out here to people who are between 0 to 100K a month. Most of the time, you've got to do the process first, and then we're going to delegate it once we know what works. So many people skip this step. For example, I've got a client called Victor, and I've taught him my DM framework that booked us 375 calls in 4 months. If you want to check out that video, by the way, I'll put it in the description below. He did this for a few days, and he saw it's pretty hard to do it, and it wasn't that enjoyable. So he wanted to hire an SDR and delegate it straight away. But the problem is that some of the leads he was booking calls with were unqualified. So if he'd done this straight away, what would have happened is the SDR would have come in, they probably would have booked even more unqualified people, and there was no system in place because as the founder, no one will understand your business as well as you do. So what I said to him is you've got to think about the long-term impact of this. You've got to do it yourself first, document it as you go along, which we'll get to in a second, and then you can delegate it to an SDR and you can focus on the next system. And even though it might not be enjoyable, you've got to get it right. If you skip this step, step 2, which most people will, because it's going to require some hard work and rolling up your sleeves, none of the rest of the system will work because the foundation, the inputs, aren't high quality. So let's take the DM system as an example. You want to book more calls by sending direct messages on LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever the platform. You need to go in there, you need to figure out who to reach out to, and you need to figure out how to have messages with people. You will do this and you will split test. Does that message work? Does it work sending messages on Wednesday versus weekends? All different things that you're going to have to split test over the course of 1, 2, maybe even 3 months. And then you'll figure out what works and you figure out what doesn't. And as you go through this process, you record it on Loom. And you just need to have the mindset that I'm going to delegate this to someone else, which actually makes it more enjoyable. And what we're creating here is what we call an SOP, which is a standard operating procedure, which in itself is a system. And once you've got that, then you can delegate it to someone else. So you record Loom videos, and what you want to try and do is narrate what's happening. So kind of like I'm doing here, sharing my screen, I'm going through something, and I'm narrating as I'm going along. And what you're essentially doing is you're creating training manuals. And Loom, now like anything else, has transcripts. So you can take this transcript, you can put it into ChatGPT, and then it will spit out a document, which is your SOP, which then we can use that to give to someone so they can do this for you. And you want to go as granular as possible. And it depends on what the task is. The more specific you could get, the less chance of mistakes, the higher likelihood they're going to get the outcome that you want. All these little intricacies that you need to figure out by actually doing it, because let me tell you the truth, no one cares about your business as much as you do. So if someone else does it on your behalf, it means that it will get done half-arsed. If you want to have half-arsed systems, you'll get half-arsed results and you'll probably never scale past 100K a month. Do the dirty work yourself. figure it out, document with Loom videos, and now it starts getting fun because we can find someone to delegate it to. So step 3, hire through volume. Now again, depends what kind of tasks, but if you do less than 100k a month, you're probably doing a lot of jobs that a VA could do overseas for $3 an hour. So we want to get rid of these things first. Now, when I come to speak to my clients, when I ask them how they hired someone, they literally just put a job out on one of these freelance platforms and they just picked the first person, had a conversation, thought, yeah, they're pretty good, and then hired them. Don't do that. The ideal situation, get 100 applicants in the top of the funnel. This is a recruitment funnel. I'm going to tell you the different steps in a second, but get 100 in the top, and then what will come out the bottom is a few diamonds in the rough. If you do 100 and every single client I've taught this to has the same experience, you will notice the difference between good and great. But if you just speak to one person, hire them, and you've not hired many people before, you won't understand the difference in talent. And talent, finding the right people to work these systems, is the best investment of time as a founder. And if you find the right person for the system, they'll probably make it even better than you made it. And even better than that, they'll probably be able to build their own systems using this 5-step framework. And one of my clients, Henry, he works with local businesses. And the way he books calls is by cold calling. And again, he wasn't really enjoying it. And he was thinking, God, I'm going to have to do this forever. And I was like, no, it's fine, Henry. What you need to do is, like I said, document the process. Then what he did is he put out a job description. He hired some cold callers, and now he's got a team of 3 cold callers that are booking more calls, obviously, than he did, so he can focus on a different part of the business. And by the way, Henry's 20 years old, so if Henry can do it, you can do it too. Now, the first step, like I said to Henry, is creating a job description. So think about the skill sets that are needed. If you're really struggling, just get AI to write something. But what you need to do before you post a job ad is put some filters in place. So the first step is basic information, like their name, if you want to get their CV, LinkedIn profile maybe. But what I'd recommend is record a Loom video telling me a bit about yourself. Why would you do this? Because it filters out a lot of the poor quality applications. If people don't have good internet or they're not really that interested in the job, they just won't be bothered to record a Loom video. So you get the serious people. Step 2 is you get a task for them to complete. So again, if we're talking about the cold calling example, what you do there is you give them a load of objections and you would say, record me a 30-second voice note saying how you would handle this objection, and do it for 5 different objections. So you filtered out a load of people in the first step, then you've got the task, you filter out a load of people there, and the people you're left with, you conduct an interview. Now, I can do 1 or 2 interviews depending on how high profile the job is, but you'll probably have roughly 2 to 5 people, which are the diamonds in the rough. Another bonus, which I didn't tell you before, because you put 100 applicants in the top, what you can now have is a pipeline of people, because the likelihood is you're probably going to hire someone like this again once you scale your business. For example, if it's Henry and he's hiring a cold caller, once he grows more, he's probably going to need another cold caller. But he's already built a pipeline of cold callers now, so it's going to save him a lot of time, especially if he's scaling fast. Now, where'd you get the applicants from? Well, there's lots of different sources. I think at the time recording, LinkedIn, if you've got the budget to do it, just run a LinkedIn job ads, or there's lots of different freelance platforms. Again, it depends on the skill set needed for the job. And the other thing is, recommendations are also useful. It's just make sure you speak to multiple people, because even if you have the best system in the world, if you hire someone who's terrible, they will break it. As the old saying goes, you can't put lipstick on a pig. I wonder if anyone's ever tried that. Anyway, on to the next step. So this is where if you've done step 2 properly and you've documented and you've understood the split test, the amount of work that's involved to get the result, you should be able to set expectations. Now, before the KPIs, I'd recommend doing short-term trials. If you can do a shorter trial as a startup, you shouldn't be committing to long-term contracts until you know that this person's good. Just see it as a probation period. So specific KPI is, what is the KPI for that person? What is the number? So let's say it's cold calling. How many calls do they have to do every single day for the month trial period? You got to set that expectation. You should know this if you did step 2 properly, because you'll know if you do 100 calls a day, then you can get 10 calls booked a month. And that might be your KPI. Again, going back to the thinking of My biggest constraint is we need to book more calls. So if we do 100 calls a day, we book the 10 calls, then we're going to grow our business to the next level. But if you don't do step 2, you wouldn't know those KPIs, so you wouldn't be able to set them. So you set the person you've hired a specific KPI, and then what you do is you set a review call at the end of their trial period. So they know by this period of time that you're going to be reviewing that KPI, and if they don't hit it, then it's a very easy conversation. Hey, you didn't hit the KPI. I'm assuming, as you know, I'm going to have to go and find someone else. All the best. And then the last thing that really helps, and this will make your team members really happy, is reward them. Maybe they go above the KPI. Fantastic. Reward them for that. Humans repeat behavior that they get rewarded for, and they will stop repeating behavior when they're punished for it. So if they hit the target or if they go above the target, make sure you give them the rewards because they probably work really hard and they deserve it. And then step 5 is delegate and evaluate. This is the part that most founders don't like once you're building the system, is letting go. Now, if you're under 100K a month, as a founder, you're not going to be able to afford people that can do your job as good as you. You are the genius in your business, but you've got to accept if someone does your job to 80% of the standard you can do it and you get your time back, that's a lot better than you trying to do everything yourself and then your focus is split. And the thing is you've got to understand that people will make mistakes. You've got the KPI, you've got the expectation, but you've got to give some leadway. And you can't micromanage people. And that's why we've set up the Loom videos. We've set up the documents. So you've got the SOP to follow. So they don't need to constantly talk to you. Because if you're constantly micromanaging someone and speaking to them all the time, it just defeats the object. The whole point is you get your time back to focus on the next thing. And also the other thing is understand you're probably not, even if you do the recruitment process I recommended, going to get all of your first hires right. And no one does. It's part of the process. If you get PTSD from hiring, which I know a lot of my clients have, and you think,
yeah, I tried to hire someone, it just didn't work out.
Well, if you think like that and you don't think you can ever find someone to replace your job, then guess what? You're always going to stay small because you need to be able to let go so you get your time back. Now, just like you were doing in step 2, you should be getting the person who's now doing the work to be tracking. So if you were split testing properly, again, let's say you were sending the direct messages and you're saying, yeah, I need to send 50 messages a day and maybe you get 30% response rate, whatever it might be. You want the person you've now delegated it to be tracking their metrics so you can start to see the trends, because then you can course correct. And again, this is not micromanaging, it's just they give you an end of day report. The tracking system, it can just be a Google spreadsheet, nothing fancy. You've just got to see the data and make sure that everyone's aware of it. And then as a founder, you can monitor the progress versus the KPI. And at the end of the month, you have the review call, and that's where you decide to either make this a long-term hire or you've got to go through the process. And if they didn't work out, you'd essentially go back to the other people that you filtered out in your pipeline and hire one of those people and start that process again. And then once you've successfully hired someone long-term, they're doing the work for you and you trust them, then you get your time back to build the next system. So then it goes all the way back and you then define the next constraint in your business from these 8 KPIs that I mentioned here before, and you start again. And that, in a nutshell, is how you build systems. And that's the exact framework that I used to build 2 7-figure agencies from scratch and teach over 300 founders. And if you want to see a system in action, I just created another video recently showing the exact framework that I used to book 375 calls in 4 months from LinkedIn DMs. And the way that I built this system is using that process. And if you want to book more sales calls, click here, execute, and enjoy. I'll speak to you soon.